affected by the militant group's slow return of dead hostages. Israel and Hamas have accused each other of violating their days-old truce.
And the militant group has stressed it's committed to the ceasefire and that it wants to return all the remaining bodies of hostages left in Gaza. But it said the process will require some time, as some are buried in tunnels destroyed during the war. Israel has warned that phase 2 of the ceasefire will not begin until all dead hostages are returned. The IDF has been ordered to ready plans to defeat Hamas should the truce collapse.
And for more insight on the truce and the path forward to definitively ending the Gaza war, let's speak with Jessica Genauer. She's senior lecturer in international relations at Flinders, and she joins us right now from Adelaide. Dr. Genauer, good to have you back on the show. So the Trump administration has gone from saying it believes Hamas is not violating the deal to Trump declaring we'll go in and kill them. So what exactly has happened, to cause, I guess, to prompt, if you like, this escalation? And who's we, in the we'll go in and kill them?
So I think that President Trump does actually get quite influenced by day-to-day events and images in the news media. And that's partly because he himself, I think, is genuinely affected by those images, and partly because he knows that he's primarily speaking to his sort of domestic US audience, and that people in the US will also be watching those images and will be impacted by them. So we saw this originally when the Israeli military campaign was continuing in the Gaza Strip, and that there was that ongoing humanitarian crisis, which is obviously still not fully alleviated. And Trump really did seem to get affected by that, and that seemed to partly prompt Trump to insist on this current sort of tentative ceasefire situation that's currently in place. So I think after the ceasefire took hold, and then these images started to come out of supposedly, Hamas personnel undertaking these sort of executions within the Gaza Strip, Trump again felt sort of that he needed to comment on that and to say something primarily for his own US domestic audience, who might be starting to think, well, was the ceasefire a bad idea? What's going to happen? Now, when Trump says we will come into the Gaza Strip, he is actually not meaning US boots on the ground at all. I'm very confident about that, because putting US troops on the ground would be a disastrous decision for Trump domestically. What I think he's referring to is actually a continuation of the Israeli military campaign, which essentially Trump brought pressure to bear on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for Israel to at least partially withdraw militarily and to cease that ongoing military campaign. So that's what Trump would be referring to with that statement.
And Dr. Genauer, at the center of the stalemate are the bodies of hostages. Just how difficult is it in practice for Hamas to recover and return them? Do you think they overpromised? And on the other side, is Israel asking for the impossible?
So I do actually think that it would genuinely be quite difficult to get the remains of those hostages back. So hostages that are alive is one thing. They can be located and returned back to Israel, as we saw with those 20 hostages who were still alive in the Gaza Strip. Remains of hostages who have unfortunately died is going to be much more difficult, because we're talking about a war that's been going on now for almost 2 years, or a bit over 2 years if we think about when the hostages were actually taken. And so if, someone did die months ago or a year ago, it could be very difficult, if not almost impossible, to actually locate and get those remains back. Apparently, I think what's happened is not so much that Hamas overpromised, but that Hamas did raise these issues in the negotiations that took place prior to this ceasefire coming into effect. But I think what's happened is that President Trump was very keen to see his 20-point peace plan implemented as is. And in the 20-point peace plan, it was stated that the remains of hostages would also be returned. And no sort of caveat was put on that in terms of a final agreement. So I don't think it was so much that Hamas said it would be easy to get the remains of those bodies back, but it's more that those details and nuances and caveats in terms of a more kind of realistic and nuanced agreement were not really taken into account when this ceasefire came into effect.
Dr. Genauer, Israel and Hamas agreed on a mechanism, for searching for missing bodies involving the International Red Cross, for example, and others. I'm just wondering, why isn't this being used to resolve this impasse, or is it just logistically challenging?
So what's very tricky here, and this is where we start to come up against the really complex, intractable issues that were not addressed in any kind of detailed way in that 20-point peace plan that was put forward, is we're starting to come up against issues of governance and security control in the Gaza Strip. So for an international mission to go in, there would need to be clear security mechanisms in place within the Gaza Strip so that those international personnel could be confident that they are going to have safe passage within the Gaza Strip whilst they are going from place to place and possibly, looking for the remains of those hostages. So this is something, and in order for there to be security, there also needs to be stable and clear governance in the Gaza Strip. We need to know who's in control. Now, in the past, for many years now, the Hamas group have been inseparable from security and governance control of the Gaza Strip. So if Hamas is going to step out of that role, it needs to be very clear who will be stepping into that role in order for there to be enough stability and security and governance in the Gaza Strip for Palestinians themselves, of course, first and foremost, but then also for international actors to be able to go into the Gaza Strip and operate in a way that they feel their safety will also be assured.
Very quickly, Dr. Genauer, aid we know has become a pressure point here, a focal point here. Why this attention on the Rafah crossing? Why is Rafah so crucial compared to, say, Karim Shalom or Erez?
Yeah, that's right. So there is actually focus on all crossing points into the Gaza Strip as points where aid could come in. But there are, I guess, greater hopes for the Rafah crossing, as that's one where typically aid has been able to come in, in a more sort of consistent and frequent way. What we're seeing is that aid is ready to come in. It's available. International organizations, a lot of them under the UN, are absolutely willing and ready to bring all of that aid into the Gaza Strip. A lot of aid has been going in since the ceasefire. But in order for that to continue in a consistent and stable way, again, we're going to need to see clear and stable governance and security conditions in the Gaza Strip so that that can actually continue. So again, that really critical issue is going to need to be dealt with in a substantial way that can actually provide those conditions over the, coming weeks and months, not just for days.
Understood. Dr. Genauer, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us. Jessica Genauer, a senior lecturer in international relations at Flinders University.